Hello, my tender beauties. It's me, Mad Scientist. I'm making this video to address another video made by LuxRay978. LuxRay is among a handful of Redditors who had a strong negative reaction to seeing a hamster living underwater and assumed the absolute worst of me without looking into any of the precautions I've taken. These precautions include the positive pressure design, which can leak bubbles but not admit water, doubly redundant air compressors, battery backup, heated floors, dehumidified air, desiccant litter, a thermometer and hygrometer combo inside the habitat for monitoring temperature and humidity, and of course a live camera feed of the aquarium accessible on my phone from anywhere in the world. Even when these precautions are explained, the outrage mob does not put down their pitchforks. They had a knee-jerk reaction to something they didn't understand, but they feel the need to justify it. So no matter how much they're wrong about, they just keep doubling down. Some of these people have asked, what's wrong with me? The answer, as though it wasn't obvious, is autism. I'm an autistic adult. From a young age, I've been everybody's favorite punching bag. I'm very accustomed to being picked out of the crowd and dog-piled onto. This no longer bothers me. You can add another scar to the rest, but it won't be big enough that I notice. I've overcome much worse in the past, and I'll continue trying to live no matter what. Sorry to say, I don't have the same opportunities that LuxRay has. I tried for a decade to hold down various jobs, but was always fired without being told why, despite having very good metrics. Probably because if they tell you that you're fired due to a disability, it's legally actionable. I've tried many other things to make money too, such as writing, selling t-shirts, trading cryptocurrency. Some of these efforts continue to bear fruit, but not enough. This is the first project I've had enough success with that I was able to support myself independently for a time, and she wants to take that away. I'm sure she'd like to see me on the street, which I'm also no stranger to, hence my video recently about how to help the homeless. If she has ever lifted a finger to help anybody less fortunate than herself, I have seen no indication of it and will not hold my breath. LuxRay is a prime exemplar of cancel culture. Literally anything anybody does that attracts a large enough audience will become a target. With enough eyeballs on the project, some subculture somewhere will have a problem with what you're doing for some reason, and it only takes a few people to get you canceled. One of the other instigators, perhaps both of them, but one of them for sure, is a furry communist. I don't know if I mentioned that yet. That's kind of poetic that a communist would try to take down Hampture. These are people who don't believe in due process and feel entirely comfortable holding the lives of strangers in their hands. The thing about communists is that they behave as though they're in power long before they actually are. That's how they think the world ought to be, right up until they're the ones getting canceled. Then suddenly it's wrong, you see. The principal objection to my project seems to be that it makes a good deal of money. The Reddit thread, the video that I'm replying to, and the posts on Twitter all start out by proclaiming, "Look at how much money this guy's making." I'm not sure why that part upsets them, it's just something that I noticed. The second objection is the small size of the cage. It's about the size of two standard Habitrail ovos, linked end to end with a section of tunnel. For reference, here's the Habitrail ovo. For further reference, this is the size of a typical burrow in which wild hamsters spend much of their lives, leaving only to forage for food on the surface, and they do cover quite a bit of ground. That's why I included the wheel, to satisfy their need to exercise. Even pet hamsters run up to 8 miles per night in their wheels. The response was that the wheel is not good enough, although it was never explained why. If you don't accept that a wheel is a sufficient substitute for that exercise, then you need an enclosure that's 8 miles across. If you do accept that a wheel is a sufficient substitute, then there is no qualitative difference between a small cage and a large one, provided they both have wheels. The figure quoted to me by critics was a minimum of 450 square inches of floor space. This seems to come from hamster forums. I couldn't find it on any pet care websites. What I found was a minimum size of 24 inches by 12 inches for the floor space. The recommended headroom was about 12 inches for Syrians. That's the minimum, and it does say that bigger is better. In its current form, Hampture has about that much floor space. The ceilings are lower than recommended, but I'm also using a smaller breed. These figures are for Syrian hamsters, minor dwarf hamsters. Megahab will have all this and more within a single structure, and I intend to link several of them together. Now I want to flip the magnifying glass around and examine the priorities of my critics for a little bit. One of the two main instigators is a Redditor whose username I won't give out here because I don't approve of outrage mobs. I can't protect Luxray from this effect because, of course, it's her video that I'm replying to. The other fella is, as I mentioned earlier, a furry communist. A sincere one, so far as I can tell. I don't remember if it was him or Luxray. I think it was Luxray who made a now widely retweeted Reddit post joking about the nutritional merits of consuming dog semen. I want to stress that was indeed a joke that they were making. They posted it on a satire subreddit. There's enough reason to rebuke these people without taking things out of context. And just because somebody makes you angry does not make it okay to lie about them. These two winners are at least vegans, which makes them slightly less hypocritical than most of my critics, who overwhelmingly are not vegans. They have no problem in practice with having much larger, more intelligent animals than hamsters, such as cows and pigs, slaughtered so that they can eat their flesh, but somehow they consider it much worse to house a hamster safely and comfortably underwater. They say that those two things have nothing to do with each other. But what they're really saying is, don't bring that up, that's inconvenient for my narrative and exposes my hypocrisy. Too bad I'm bringing it up. I mean, I'm not a vegan either, but I also have no problem with this project, so there's no hypocrisy in my case. I was never claiming moral superiority to these people, only pointing out their hypocrisy and disordered priorities, given that they flip their shit when they see hamsters living underwater in safety and comfort, but eat a steak without batting an eye. They also have seemingly no problem whatsoever with giving live feeder rats to pet reptiles. Look away from your screen if you don't want to see something actually fucked up. They have no problem with this. Or this. Or this.
If you're doing that 6 weeks, just like you, but better yet, hi girls, Uncle Bobby here.
They say they do when they're shown this stuff, but if you search their YouTube histories prior to that point, or Twitter histories for that matter, it was not even on their radar. They only started pretending to care about it when I brought it up because it was necessary for their argument. Rats are in every way more sensitive, intelligent creatures than hamsters. It is not necessary to live feed rats to snakes, lizards, or turtles. It's not necessary to keep pets in general, let alone underwater. This is the perspective that they're lacking. When I pointed out that Aquarius Reef Base is by far more cramped proportionally than Hampture and houses 6 humans for up to 1 month, they say the humans had a choice whether to be there. As if the hamsters living on land in regular cages have a choice whether to be there or not. Of course they don't. A cage is a cage. Putting it underwater makes no difference. I made a long post explaining the precautions I've taken in the Reddit thread about this project on the animal rights subreddit. But the communist furry I mentioned earlier is a mod of that sub and deleted it, along with every post which took my side. That should not surprise anybody, as censorship is the first resort of such people. They will cry about the rights of hamsters, even while taking your rights away. Not only your rights, but your livelihood. Choosing, according to their own belief system, who may live their lives and who will be busted down to poverty. For such class-conscious people, they sure cause a lot of poverty and homelessness. They have already contacted animal rights organizations, which basically told them the same things that I have. That, contrary to their animal intuition, the hamsters do not actually appear to be stressed, that the habitat is unconventional, but not automatically dangerous, and that unless they see water entering or something of that nature, they can't intervene. Many have also reported me to PETA, which is a rich joke considering PETA's abysmal animal rights record. In the past 10 years, I have killed 0 hamsters. In that same period, PETA has killed 22,561 dogs and cats. Why is that okay? Why are PETA the good guys here and I'm the bad guy? The most frustrating thing about this experience has been their reaction to my corrections. Initially, nearly every accusation they made was false. All of it stuff they assumed based on watching a couple seconds of one of my videos. But even when corrected on those wrong assumptions, one by one, they never changed their minds because their feeling of outrage did not diminish. They seem to think that if they feel morally virtuous, they can't be wrong. There's no arguing with that feeling. They won't listen, nothing will change their minds. They'll do everything in their power to gain leverage over you, first thing. It's really about domination. Once they have the power to inflict real-world harm on you, and they have you at their mercy, then they can decide whether you live or die. But until they have you in that position, they don't want to hear anything that comes out of your mouth unless it's tearful apologies and begging for mercy. That's what they think they're owed. I cannot stress this enough. These people are not police. They're not in any sort of seat of political power either. They just act like it. They're regular people behind computer screens who proceed under the deep-seated assumption that they should have the power to destroy people that they don't know based on how they feel about them. If you ask me, that's a hell of a lot more dangerous than building an underwater hamster habitat. These parting words are not for my critics. They've already made up their minds. It's for everybody else who hasn't yet. Perhaps you're stumbling onto this channel for the first time because of this video. Despite the getup, I'm obviously not a real scientist, nor am I mad, just annoyed currently. Accordingly, the hamsters are not test subjects. They are beloved pets. I'm not testing any hypothesis. The only testing that happens is of every new habitat for 72 hours in the aquarium without a hamster inside, just to ensure that everything is watertight and that it's safe for occupation. Everything I'm about to say can be found in the frequently asked questions panel underneath my Twitch feed, but nobody reads it. People still pop into the Twitch, and the first thing out of their mouth is a question that's answered in the FAQ. But here goes anyway. The hamsters do not live full-time underwater. There's only one of them in the habitat at any given time. There's a land cage and a underwater habitat. And there's a hamster in each at any given time, but once a month they trade places. This means only half their lives are spent underwater. The other half is spent in a much larger, more spacious land cage. And in addition to that, I occasionally take them out when the weather is nice so they can have outdoor adventures in the park. It has been said that I taped a hamster to a drone. That is not true. Upon further inspection, the accusation was revised to say that I had put a hamster in a section of PVC pipe without air holes attached to a drone by tape. That's also not the case. It was a capsule container with a transparent lid that the hamster could see out of, and there were air holes. As for whether the hamster was frightened, you can see in the footage it's quite calm. Doubtless it was less frightened than the mice and rats being torn apart or drowned by lizards and turtles earlier in this video. I really feel like this would have been less controversial if the public knew that nobody in history has ever died due to drowning in an underwater habitat, of which there have been about 70 so far. They trap air at the same pressure as the outside water, so contrary to what you may have seen in a television program such as Lost, in the event that a window blows out or something, the water level will only rise to the top of the gap of whatever point the water is entering through. I could, in fact, drill a hole in the lid, and provided it was a small hole, air would bubble out, but water would not enter. The danger factor, which is of course what makes it compelling, is largely an illusion. Positive pressure underwater habitats are fantastically safe and idiot-proof. What I'm doing can be compared loosely to a father taking his children to Disney World and putting them on all sorts of fast and exciting roller coasters, which would be very alarming to somebody, say, from a pre-industrial society who had never seen a roller coaster before and did not understand the exhaustive engineering that goes into making those things safe, even though they appear wildly dangerous. Of course, while this didn't start out as an experiment, and still isn't really, that's not to say I haven't learned many useful things applicable to the improvement of underwater habitats, which have more applications than you might think on a warming Earth with rising sea levels. Contrary to some dramatizations you may have seen and the film Waterworld, even in the worst case scenario, we can expect a sea level rise of at most 200 feet, which is nothing to sneeze at, but there will be plenty of land left. There will also be plenty of fresh, very fertile continental shelf, which is a good thing, kind of, in that it is excellent for mariculture, which is the practice of offshore farming of edible sea life. This farming takes place in tremendous floating mesh enclosures, as you can see now, which require constant repairs, maintenance, inspection. Right now, that's done by teams of 6 bounce divers, which are just scuba divers that operate from the surface and are shuttled out by a speedboat. That's not really sustainable as you scale up this kind of agriculture to feed a future population of 10 billion people, all of whom want to eat meat. You can't tell them not to. You can't tell them as a first worlder, no, don't eat meat, it's for the environment. They're going to say, well, where the fuck was your concern for the environment when you were scarfing down Big Macs? They all want to eat meat, and the most ecologically sound source of meat is mariculture. So if we want to scale this up so that developing countries can have their fish burgers and whatnot, we need the ability to do saturation diving on a historically unprecedented scale. We need large teams of divers living on the seabed or in enclosures on the underside of these floating cages, just living there in rotations, in perhaps 2 to 3 week rotations, where you have a crew that lives on shore or in the top of the structure, and you have a crew that lives at the bottom in the habitat, whether it's mounted to the bottom portion of the structure or it's on the seabed. And they trade places, much in the same way that my hamsters do at set intervals, going through decompression procedures each time. This practice of saturation diving increases their bottom time per diver by about a factor of 4. Instead of being able to stay on the bottom only 2 hours, a little bit more perhaps, you can now spend up to 9 hours in the water. You're really limited only by your air supply and by your physical endurance. That's why Aquarius Reef Base exists. It greatly increases the amount of research which can be done on that given site. Most of it has to do with the adjacent coral reef. They get about a year's worth of research dives done within 2 to 3 weeks. One problem underwater habitats cannot solve is a lack of living space. But there really isn't one. We have plenty of shitty unused desert, and then there's the polar regions. When people talk about overpopulation, what they're really talking about is population growth outstripping our ability to feed the global population. And that is most readily solved by properly utilizing the 70% of the Earth that's covered in water, which we have until now mostly used as a place to dump industrial waste and to pull fish out of, in the same manner that our ancestors nomadically hunted and gathered. We have not made the jump from hunting and gathering in the ocean as we have on land. Once we make proper agricultural use of the ocean, which is, by the way, not a 2-dimensional farming surface as land is, it's 3-dimensional. The water column is is deep, you can stack farming enclosures down into it, which greatly multiplies the amount of farmable volume. Once we make proper use of that space for food cultivation, it's really difficult to even estimate the number of human lives that we could sustain. So there is something to all this. There's a method to my madness. I'm not just some maniac who gets off on putting hamsters underwater. I'm prototyping habitats that solve problems of ballasting, of expandability and things like that on a small scale, because that's what I can afford. And even on the small scale, it's difficult to pay for without the kind of support that I get from my Patreon followers, my YouTube followers. So take that into account before you decide that I'm hamster Hitler or something. And these people who are enticing you to jump on their emotional cancellation bandwagon, question their motives. Question, why they're so hung up on the fact that I make money out of it. Look at their politics. And then look at my motives. Look at what I do with the money and what I hope to accomplish with all this. That's all, I guess.